Hey guys, it's that time of the year. Everybody's making their lists, so why would I be any different? I'm here to give you my top 10 favorite albums of 2023, and without further ado, let's start off with number 10, Marduk Memento Mori, out on Century Media. This is my favorite black metal album of the year. There was a lot of other records in the contention, in the discussion if you will, but when I look at the design, when I look at the sound, when I look at the vocals, when I look at the production, the way this album comes across really hits home for me. This album sounds the way I like my black metal albums to sound, bringing in a little bit of an old school approach with a little bit more modern production behind it, but not necessarily letting the pendulum swing one way or another, finding the sweet spot, if you will, and deliver a record that is memorable, that has great songs, that has great sound, that really feels like it become one of those records that's going to be a memorable album for a band that's been around for a very long time. So when I looked at all the components of this record, I really had to put them in my top 10 list because, like I said, it's my favorite black metal album of the year. At number 9, we have Orbit Culture with Descent, out on Seek and Strike. Now, these boys from Sweden can do no wrong. It doesn't matter if they release an EP, doesn't matter if they release an album. In this case, this year, they released both, an EP and an album. But I'm here to tell you that at number 9 comes their full-length record, and this to me is a more mature album than its predecessor. Musically, I may be connected a little bit more to the predecessor, but when I look at the quality of the overall album, once again, I'm not just looking at the individual songs. I'm looking at the individual songs and the context of the record, the overall structure, the production behind it, the overall vocal approach. This is a better album. It has a much better idea of what it wants, not only from the individual tracks, but from itself in general. And I really like to see the gradual progression of these guys. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, getting added to bigger and bigger tours. And I think this is one of those albums that opens the door to a very bright future. If the previous record had already helped at least maybe not open the door, but let people know where the door is, I really feel like this is the album that's going to open the door wide open. And God knows, sky is the limit as far as Orbit Culture is concerned. At number 8, we have Krypto, Shadows of Sorrow, out on Napalm Records. This is a solid record by Krypto. The only issue I had with this album, and I mentioned this on my original review, is the bass sound. I honestly feel like the bass sound could have been a little bit more toned down. It felt too much, too strong in the mix. Outside of that, this is an outstanding death metal record. A much stronger album than their debut record. Guitar-wise, this sounds a lot better. It feels a lot stronger. It has more direction. It has more sense of purpose. It connects better with the DNA of the band. And overall, the song construction, the design, the tracks in terms of where they start, where they go, and how they take you across that journey, everything feels a lot more complete. It's not a record that is heavy for the sake of being heavy. It's a record that has an idea in mind, and then it not only has an idea in mind, it delivers upon that idea. So incredible job by Krypto. What a sophomore record. Not easy to release a sophomore record that hits harder than the debut album. At number 7, we have Sylosis, A Sign of Things to Come, out on Nuclear Blast. This was a phenomenal record by Sylosis. A little bit of a departure, well, maybe more than a little, but definitely a departure from previous records. This is a groovier sounding album. It's more a groove metal album than anything else. And I feel like this is their DNA. This is their sound. They experimented, they've tried other things, and they worked, because when you're a good musician and you're surrounding yourself by good musicians, you cannot make bad music. So these guys have never released a bad record, but I feel like they were going further and further away from their actual DNA, and this album was a return to the origin. And because of that, it just had this incredible impact front to back. Pick any song on this album, there isn't one single bad track, and it's Sylosis at their best. Speaking of their best, at number 6, we have Insomnium with Anno 1696, out on Century Media. Talk about a band that can't release a bad record, a bad song, a bad riff, a bad melody. a bad album design. I mean, there's nothing that these guys can do that is bad. There's just a band that has a bar set extremely high, and when you think that they've put it so high that it cannot be surpassed, they release something else that moves that bar slightly higher. And I felt like this record is just one of those. Great concept, great idea, great delivery, great songs. Insomnium at their best. Really strong album. I'm not going to sit here and say that this is their best album to date, because it's not, but it's not that far behind. It's a great record nevertheless. Really strong album. Within the mellow death sound, this was definitely my favorite for the year. I just feel like it has all of those melodic death metal elements that are very traditional, specifically to Finnish bands, and this album not only has them but enhances them for the listener's pleasure and experience. At number 5 we have Inflames with Foregone, out on Nuclear Blast. This was the album that everybody wanted from Inflames and that everybody got. This record definitely feels a little bit of a blast from the past. It feels like it's a little bit more connected with their earlier discography versus their later discography. It has a lot more raw emotion. It feels and it sounds a lot heavier. It's a little bit more spontaneous, if you will. It's more intensive, and it's not as polished. And when I mean polished, I don't mean from a production or from a soundscape point of view. I mean more from the emotion that goes into it. This feels more like a bunch of pissed off kids, even though they're not pissed off kids, but that's the attitude that they have, is a reinvigorated attitude that Foregone has, and allows this album to really stand out, and easily in the last 10 years being one, if not their best record within that period of time. At number 4 we have my favorite thrash metal album of 2023, Overkill with Scorched, out on Nuclear Blast. Wow, what an album by Overkill. This record is phenomenal. Phenomenal. It has all of those Overkill attributes. Great riffing, great solos, a really well played bass that comes through perfectly in the mix, not overshadowing the guitars, but rather, complementing the guitar sound and the drum sound. And then Bobby Blitz, vintage Bobby Blitz on vocals. I mean, this is an album that has Circle Pit, Mosh Pit written all over it. There's no bad songs on this record. When you think of thrash metal, this is what you want to listen to. This is what you want to see live being performed. And this is an album that definitely separates itself from its predecessor. I felt like the predecessor maybe treading water a little bit as far as what that record delivers, or at least from the expectations coming into that album. But this one surpassed all my expectations. Definitely the best thrash metal album of the year, followed by what I believe to be the best progressive power metal album of the year, Unera, Cycles of Pain, out on Atomic Fire. Wow, these guys always push the envelope. They're very unique, and they're not afraid of trying new things, bring new ideas, create new sounds, create new journeys, new visual soundscapes, if that's even a thing. And this record is no different. A lot of guest appearances, both by vocalists and musicians, bringing in their Brazilian roots to the sound, to how some of these songs are constructed. Really bringing that DNA in allows them to have a very specific fingerprint as a band, which then allows the album to have a very specific fingerprint as well. But such a great sounding record, a very interesting journey, a journey that you dive head first, and you don't want the journey to end, because the record has no soft spots. It's a very strong album all around. Next we have at number 2, Cattle Decapitation with Terracite, out on Metal Blade. Now, this is a record that I didn't think would be possible to surpass Death Atlas, because I thought that Atlas was the best record that Cattle Decapitation has ever released. It still might be, but this one, it's neck and neck. I feel more connected to this record because I feel like this vocally is a stronger album. It feels more emotional. It feels more raw in that emotion, and it's able to work well that emotional aspect of the album with the heavier side of the record. It doesn't become chaotic. It doesn't become uncontrolled. It's an album that has a sense of shape, of where it is, of where it's going. It never loses that shape. The intensity and the aggression are such that the volatility still finds a way of staying contained within the box in which it was created. So because of that, and because of it, of coming on the heels of Death Atlas, this album becomes even more important because, like I said, I didn't think you could surpass what that album delivered. But this, to me, looking even only from a vocal standpoint, I honestly feel like this is a stronger album vocally. So I have to put this, maybe 1 inch above Death Atlas, but the two are neck and neck. And because of that, the album ends up in number 2 on my list. Finally, number 1, As in Hell, A&P Aura, out on Metal Blade Records. This is a surprise probably for you, and it's a surprise for me. Because when I heard about this record, when I heard about this supergroup, I honestly didn't give it too much attention. I didn't think too much of it. I thought it was kind of gimmicky, and I didn't think there was going to be anything good coming from it. I just felt like forced, like this feels a little bit forced, feels a little bit contrived, and I prefer if music comes across in a more natural way. I was completely wrong on all accounts. The moment I pressed play on this record, immediately I knew that this was going to be the best death metal album of 2023, and I had high hopes, and I honestly felt like it was going to be my favorite album of the year. It's both, and this is a year for me that death metal really gave us a lot of great choices. I mean, 3 death metal albums on my top 10. You got Krypto, you got Decapitation, and now As in Hell. I love the sound on this record. It's a more old school death metal sound. It feels like a throwback to the late 80s, early 90s, especially like the Swedish death metal scene at that time. And I'm a sucker for that. I love that. That's what I listened to growing up. Bands like Entombed. So this album really fits into that mold, and because of that, resonated with me. I love the vocals on this record, the ruggedness, the harshness, how rough they are, matching so well with that more organic, almost dirtier death metal sound that includes some thrash metal riffs, that includes some black metal elements. It's not a purely death metal defining album. It has other influences from other genres coming in order to add some spice, but always keeping in mind that death metal, it's the core, it's the spinal cord of their sound, of the project, and of this record, and that allows the album to have a lot of life. It just gives a lot, and it doesn't matter if you're listening to it for the first time or the 100th time, it always sounds fresh. This is the album from start to finish that I heard the most the whole year, and it came out later in the year, in the last third of the year, so that tells you what kind of impact this album had on me. This is it. This is my top 10 albums of 2023. Let me know who made your top 10 list. Hit me up in the comment section. I'm sure we're going to have some in common, and I'm sure we're going to have some that are completely different. So I'm always excited to see what you can put forward, because maybe there's some albums that I missed, and maybe there's some albums that deserve to be on this list. But all the time I always say this, these lists are very personal. It comes down to your personal preferences, even though I tried sometimes to take a little bit of an outside look in, because I want to be fair to the bands and I want to be fair to the records that I review throughout the year. But I stand on this hill, and on this hill I will die. These are my 10 favorite albums of the year. Let me know yours, and I'll see you all at the next video.